The gifts that Galadriel gives to each member of the Fellowship are iconic items that help carry them through the rest of the trilogy. Everything from their cloaks helping to shield them from unfriendly eyes, to the Phial of Galadriel warding off Shelob in Cirith Ungol. But what if I told you that the most impactful gift was removed from the movie entirely and replaced with a rope? Well, that's exactly what happened in Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Fellowship of the Ring, and today we are taking a look at that change and much more as we dive into the Fellowship's departure from Lothlorien. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 16 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Lord of the Rings edition. This is the show where I analyze your favorite fantasy works and their adaptations, and point out each change made scene by scene. We finally have made it to the end of the Fellowship's stay in Lorien, and this is an iconic scene of the film as it brings us one step closer to the finale of the Fellowship of the Ring. Lothlorien is a place of rest and rejuvenation for the company, but all good things must come to an end and they eventually have to depart. But I was shocked at just how many crucial changes Peter Jackson and his team made for this moment in the movie. Specifically, the gifts that Galadriel actually gives the members of the Fellowship in the book are almost completely different. Not only does Sam get something much better than some rope, but we find out that Arwen never gave Aragorn a necklace back in Rivendell. Plus, Galadriel is Arwen's grandma? That and more coming up in today's episode. As always, I'll cover the changes across 4 categories, which are characters, timeline, location, and plot. But before we jump into the changes, let's make sure we're up to speed on what Jackson's version of this event actually is. We left off last week with the Mirror of Galadriel, and before Jackson shows us the Fellowship leaving Lothlorien, he cuts to a scene with Saruman. We see Saruman speaking to an Uruk-hai, as we can tell that he's wrapping up his production of his massive army, and now is setting them loose with the mission of bringing him Frodo and the ring. After getting their pledge of loyalty, he sends them out and tells the commander to bring back the halflings alive and unspoiled. Then we cut back to Lothlorien and see the Fellowship paddling along a river. They get cloaks from Celeborn, and Aragorn is informed by him that there are special orcs bearing the white mark of Saruman on the border of their land. He gives advice on which path Aragorn should take, and then they depart. As they paddle along, we get a compilation of flashbacks of each member of the Fellowship recalling what gift Galadriel gave them. Daggers for Merry and Pippin, rope for Sam, a bow for Legolas, the light of Elendil for Frodo, and hair for Gimli. Aragorn doesn't receive a gift, as Galadriel tells him that she can give no greater gift than the necklace that Arwen gave to him in Rivendell. And Boromir is just ignored. And that is where the scene ends. Next week, we'll pick up with their journey down the river, but for now, let's address the numerous changes made in these scenes. To start, let's talk about the character, timeline, and location changes. There aren't too many, as the character changes pretty much get a pass. Haldir, who is in the earlier portion of the film, is only given a brief moment here in these scenes, but in the books he plays a much larger role. We'll discuss this more in the plot changes. Plus, there are some unnamed elves who speak to the Fellowship, but since they're unnamed, they really aren't that important. As for timeline, I think I can repeat the same from last week, which is that they're in Lothlorien for nearly a month, but the movie makes it seem like they depart the morning after the Mirror of Galadriel scene. Besides that, there isn't much difference in regard to the timeline. Lastly, there's a couple small location changes. First, they have a moment when they gather in Celeborn's chamber, which is omitted from the film. Plus, before they depart, Celeborn essentially maps out the entirety of Middle-earth for them when describing their possible paths forward. He makes a point to tell them to stay away from Fangorn Forest. In the next movie, they come upon this forest and obviously are frightened by it, but we are just led to believe that it's a widespread tale about the danger of the woods. But here in the book, Celeborn tells them specifically to avoid it. Now let's waste no time and get right into the plot changes. As we go along, as I typically do, I'll throw some bits of context in here and there to help you better understand what Tolkien wrote about these events, as there are not only changes, but complete omissions of narrative from the book. Also, if you're wanting to follow along and hear more specifically what the dialogue is between the characters, which I can't completely cover because it would take way too long, then go ahead and grab your free copy of the audiobook using my link in the description. That way you can follow along with me as I continue the series each week. Alright, so let's kick things off with our first change, which is a pretty obvious one, and that is that the scene with Saruman and the Uruk-hai never happens in the book. This scene is added to give context to the viewer, but it is never clearly stated in this chapter of the book. Later we learn learn through context clues that the Uruk-hai were hunting down the halflings for Saruman, and the orcs were hunting for Sauron, but I think Peter Jackson added the scene just to help the viewer get a better understanding of where each of these creatures' loyalties lie. Next, a moment that is omitted from the film is when the Fellowship, the same night Frodo and Sam go to the Mirror of Galadriel, go to the chamber of Celeborn and Galadriel to discuss next steps. Celeborn tells them whoever wishes to continue must decide their path now. He says if anyone wishes to turn back, they can, but Galadriel, after looking into their minds, says that they are all resolved to go forward. Celeborn asks where they will go, and Aragorn says that they have not decided. He says that he isn't sure what Gandalf had planned, or if he even had a plan at all past Lothlorien. Celeborn says that he will assist them by giving them boats, but eventually they will have to leave the boats and decide on going east or west. Another moment that is removed from the film is the Fellowship's discussion after their meeting with Celeborn and Galadriel. In the book, the Fellowship convene and discuss their path forward amongst themselves. It's as if they're waiting for a leader to step up, but Frodo is silent and Aragorn is still torn. He knows in order to fulfill his destiny he must go to Minas Tirith with Boromir, but he swore to stay with Frodo. Boromir says that he must go to Minas Tirith even if he must go alone. Then he speaks softly out loud as if he doesn't realize he's voicing his own thoughts, and he slips up at one point and says it's folly to throw away so many lives. Frodo catches this slip of the tongue, and we can tell that Boromir disagrees with the choice to take the ring to Mordor and destroy it, as he would rather use it against the enemy. As we have seen in Tolkien's version of events throughout the last few chapters, Boromir has slowly been slipping, with Galadriel's test sort of giving him that final push. Next week we will see the full extent of this fall, but for this week, just know that Frodo is becoming more wary of Boromir, especially with the way he caught him talking about the ring. It's worth noting that in the movie, Celeborn and Aragorn have a brief conversation before they leave, but this is mostly a visual representation of that council they had in the chamber the night before. And during that council, Celeborn does not warn them of the Uruk-hai like he does for Aragorn in the movie. Next, Haldir actually comes back from his border patrol the next morning to escort the Fellowship out of Caras Galadhon. They make it to the docks where they find their boats, and the elves give them supplies. They are given their cloaks and the lembas, and this moment has a couple of differences from the movie. First, these are just anonymous elves who give these gifts to them, not Celeborn. Plus, Legolas does not do an ad for lembas bread like they show in the movie, and Merry and Pippin don't eat a bunch. The elves bring the lembas, and Gimli actually takes a bite of one and then finishes it off, as he is happily surprised at how good it tastes. The elves then laugh and tell him to eat no more, as it is elvish whey bread and one loaf can sustain a grown man for a full day of travel. Gimli then says it tastes better than the Beorning's cakes, which is a big compliment as he says they are the best bakers around. Also, a small detail about the cloaks that I enjoy is that the elves say the Lady Galadriel and her maidens personally wove the cloaks for them. Now the Fellowship gets into their boats and begin to paddle down the river, but their time with the elves isn't over just yet. As they're going along, they begin to hear music as the Lady Galadriel and Celeborn are seen coming towards them in a swan-shaped boat of their own. Galadriel has a harp and is singing, and Celeborn is sitting in the boat. In the movie, they only show Galadriel standing in this swan boat, and she isn't singing. They invite the Fellowship to one last feast and pull off to the side for a meal. It is after this feast that Celeborn does his map thing and gives them all their options for travel. In typical elf fashion, he doesn't give them a definitive answer on the best route, but vaguely tells them to make smart choices and that they can't stay in the boats forever, and eventually they must leave them and head either east or west. After this, we finally come to the moment of the giving of gifts. And this time, Boromir isn't left out. First, let's cover the smaller gifts. Merry and Pippin don't get daggers, but rather belts, and so does Boromir. Merry and Pippin get silver ones, and Boromir gets a belt made of gold. Legolas does receive his bow, which the movie stays true to, but unlike the movie, Aragorn does receive a gift. First, Celeborn and Galadriel give him a sheath for Andúril, saying that the sheath will ensure the blade never rusts or degrades. Then Galadriel gives him a necklace, which we would know as Arwen's necklace from the movie. Up until this point, Aragorn has not had this necklace, unlike what is shown in the film. Galadriel then gives us a little bit of lore on this item, as she tells Aragorn that she gave it to her daughter, who then gave it to her daughter, who is Arwen. Arwen left the necklace with Galadriel last time she was there, and instructed Galadriel to give it to Aragorn should he stop by Lothlorien on his journey. So in a really roundabout way, Arwen does eventually give her necklace to Aragorn, just not in the way shown in the movie. Plus, we learn that Arwen is Galadriel's granddaughter. Next, we have Frodo, who just like in the movie gets the Phial of Galadriel, which holds the light of Arendil, their most beloved star. Before we get into Sam's gift, which is a major change from the movies, I want to cover the small changes to Gimli's gift. Just like in the movie, he receives 3 hairs from Galadriel's head, but the way he gets them is a little different. In the book, Galadriel asks what he desires, and he refuses to ask for anything, saying that it is enough that he could look upon the Lady Galadriel and Lorien. But she tells him that he can't be the only one without a gift and presses him on what he wants. Gimli says that he doesn't expect it, but since she is forcing him to speak, he says he desires a single strand of her hair, causing a collective gasp and murmuring from the elves who are watching. And a funny note is that Tolkien writes that Celeborn, who is standing right there, is definitely feeling some type of way about how this dwarf is talking to his lady. And Gimli replies that when he got home, he would set it in crystal and it would be an heirloom passed down for generations through his family and a sign of friendship between elves and dwarves. Then, right there in front of everyone, Galadriel undoes one of her braids and gives Gimli 3 strands of hair. So not a major change in the movie, but I do like the little details you get when reading about this moment in the book. By the way, a little bit of context about Galadriel's hair is kind of important here, because you might think that this is just something symbolic that Gimli is asking for, and whether he knew it or not, it was much more than that. You see, a long time before this, Fëanor, the one who made the Silmarils out of the light of the 2 trees, asked for Galadriel's hair 3 different times, and every single time she refused to give it to him. So the fact that she gave 3 strands of her hair to a dwarf of all people is pretty crazy to the elves and Celeborn that are watching her, because they had previously seen her deny Fëanor, who was one of the greatest among the elves. So now we finally come to Sam's gift. The first change I need to address about this gift is that it definitely wasn't a rope. In fact, it was the farthest thing from a rope. You know why? Because earlier when departing from the dock of Lorien, the anonymous elves gave them cloaks, lembas, and 3 coils of rope per boat, which means that they had 9 coils of rope total. So that kind of makes Sam's one a little pointless. A fun bit of context and another small change from Sam's demeanor about this gift in the movie is that after Sam sees rope in the boat, he gets excited. He tells the elves that he forgot to bring rope when leaving the Shire and has been worried about it ever since. He then says that rope making is sort of in the family and asks the elves what the ropes are made out of. The elves laugh and say they don't have time to explain it, but if they would have known he cared about it sooner, they would have taught him their ways earlier in their stay. So the fact that Sam is almost upset about receiving a rope from Galadriel in the movie is way off the mark for his personality, as a rope to him was as valuable as a gold bar. Anyway, let's now address what he actually receives from Galadriel in the book. This item is so incredible that it actually saves the day for the Shire at the end of the entire series. Galadriel hands him a tiny wooden box with the initial G carved into it. She says that it represents Galadriel, but for him it could mean gardener. She says that the box is filled with earth from her personal garden in Lothlorien, and that wherever the soil is used, growth will rival that of anywhere in Middle-earth besides Lorien itself. Now for Sam, this is an incredible gift, and one that is specifically tailored to him. It's almost a reward for his actions at the Mirror of Galadriel. If you recall from last week's episode, he could have decided to rush home, but instead stuck with Frodo and is dedicated to completing the journey. This gift from Galadriel is almost a physical manifestation of hope, as she tells him that it pretty much is useless on their journey, but should he get home again, it will do wonders. It might be one of the main reasons that Sam stays so hopeful throughout the rest of the series and continues to believe that there will be a return journey until the very end. But anyway, what good does this dirt even do? I mean, yes, it instills hope in him, and it's a very meaningful and thoughtful gift, but honestly, what is it worth in a story like this? Well, if you recall Sam's vision in the Mirror of Galadriel, he saw the future of the Shire, which included trees being cut down, factories being built, and essentially everything green and good dying. This is Sam's worst nightmare, and spoiler alert, it actually happens at the end of the trilogy. But Sam saves the day with this gift from Galadriel. It is what single-handedly restores the Shire to its green glory. Now, I won't spend any more time discussing it now because today isn't about the scouring of the Shire, but I think it's important to note how essential this gift was to the overall story and the journey of Sam and Frodo. While the ring being destroyed saves the entirety of Middle-earth, this gift from Galadriel essentially saves the Shire. So the last couple of changes we have are when they officially leave after the feast. First, Tolkien writes that Gimli and Legolas were in a boat together and had become fast friends. Again, we don't get much context as to why there was such a fast switch, but if you'll recall from last week, Legolas had been taking Gimli on patrol with him. The movie shows them in a boat together, but we don't get much of a sense of their friendship, whereas in the book, it's almost like they're in a boat together because they are friends. Lastly, Gimli cries the entire time as they're leaving Lorien, as he says he will never see that which is fairest again. Legolas tries to comfort him, saying that he will always be able to cherish the memory. Gimli says that Legolas does speak the truth, but that he doesn't long for a memory, but rather the real thing. And that is where our changes end for this week. So what do you think about these changes? Specifically, let me know in the comments what you think about the alterations with Galadriel's gifts to the Fellowship. Do you think they should have changed Sam's gift of the rope? I know adding the box of dirt wouldn't have made much sense to the viewer, but perhaps they could have thought of something better than a rope, considering they got 9 coils in their boats. Anyway, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and be sure to check out the previous episodes of this series to get caught up before next week. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.